The deck officer aboard the Japanese cruiser Tone raises his binoculars at dawn on June 19, 1944. His hands shake slightly as he focuses on the eastern horizon beyond the Philippine Sea. American carrier aircraft have been hitting Japanese positions on Guam for 2 days straight. He counts the formations. Then, he counts again. His report climbs the chain to Admiral Ozawa. The numbers make no sense. Too many planes. Too many strikes. The Americans should be exhausted by now. Their carriers should be cycling off station to rearm and refuel. That's how carrier operations work. That's how they've always worked. What he doesn't know is that the American task force steaming toward him has rewritten the rules of naval aviation in the middle of a war. What nobody in the Japanese fleet realizes yet is that they're about to face an opponent who can launch strikes at a tempo doctrine says is impossible. 600 miles to the east, on the flight deck of USS Lexington, aviation ordnance men are rearming Hellcats in 12 minutes, 12 minutes from landing to launch. The previous year, that same evolution took 45 minutes minimum, the year before that. Over an hour. Japanese carriers, built for quality over volume, still need 30 to 40 minutes per aircraft cycle. The Imperial Navy designed their carriers around the belief that each strike must be carefully prepared. That speed creates mistakes. That rushing deck operations invites disaster. They're not wrong about the danger. A carrier flight deck is controlled chaos even in peacetime. One mistake with a spinning propeller can kill 3 men. One fuel spill near a hot engine can turn a ship into a floating inferno. The Japanese Navy learned carrier operations from the British in the 1920s. The British doctrine emphasized careful preparation, methodical launch sequences, time between strikes to ensure everything is done correctly. It's a doctrine built on experience and sailor's blood. But the Americans are doing something different, something the Japanese can't quite believe when their intelligence reports start arriving in 1943 and early 1944. Let's step back to 1942. After the Battle of Midway, the U.S. Navy faces a brutal math problem. They sank 4 Japanese carriers and turned the tide in the Pacific, but they're still outnumbered. Japan has more carriers, more experienced pilots, more bases across the Pacific. American shipyards are working miracles, but new Essex-class carriers won't arrive in numbers until mid-1943. The Navy needs a force multiplier. They need to make each carrier hit harder, launch faster, strike more often. The problem is that carrier doctrine is conservative by necessity. Before the war, the Navy's Carrier Operations Manual specified detailed procedures for every evolution. Spotting aircraft on deck takes 17 specific steps. Fueling must follow strict safety protocols. Ordnance loading has 22 separate safety checks. It's all there in black and white, written by men who watched carriers burn during training accidents in the 1930s. Men who know that shortcuts on a carrier deck lead to catastrophe. Standard procedure says you can launch 1 major strike every 90 minutes. Maybe push it to 75 minutes if conditions are perfect and the crew is experienced. That's the number the war plans are built around. That's what the logistics assume. That's what every carrier captain from Lexington to Yorktown has drilled into his crew. But there's a young lieutenant commander named Paul Ramsey working on the staff of Admiral Mark Mitcher in late 1942. Ramsey isn't a pilot. He's a logistics officer, the kind of man who thinks about fuel consumption rates and ordnance tonnage, while pilots think about glory. He's been watching flight deck operations and he sees waste, not negligence, not incompetence, just inefficiency born from caution. Ramsey starts timing everything. He stands on the island with a stopwatch and a notebook. How long does it take to move 1 Hellcat from the hangar deck to the flight deck? 4 minutes and 20 seconds on average? How long to fuel it? 6 minutes if the fuel crew is waiting. How long to load ammunition? 8 minutes for a full combat load. How long to arm the pilot and run final checks? 3 minutes. Add it all up, and you get about 22 minutes per aircraft if everything flows smoothly. But it doesn't flow smoothly. Aircraft wait for fuel crews. Fuel crews wait for ordnance teams. Ordnance teams wait for aircraft to be positioned. Everyone is following procedure, but nobody is thinking about the whole system. Ramsey writes a memo. It's not popular. He suggests that carrier air groups are being operated like peacetime training squadrons when they should be operated like factory assembly lines. He suggests that the careful, sequential approach to deck operations is costing the Navy strike capacity. He suggests that with better coordination, better crew training, and smarter deck procedures, carriers could double their operational tempo. His immediate superior files the memo and forgets about it. Too radical, too risky. You don't experiment with deck operations in wartime. But someone else reads it. Captain Arleigh Burke, A destroyer commander with a reputation for aggressive tactics forwards it to Admiral Mitcher. Mitcher is the kind of officer who listens to ideas from any source. He's been a naval aviator since 1915. He knows carriers inside and out, and he knows Ramsey might be onto something. Here's the thing about military innovation. It rarely comes from the top. The generals and admirals have too much invested in current doctrine. It rarely comes from the bottom. The enlisted men are too focused on survival to see the big picture. It comes from the middle, from the lieutenant commanders and captains who are close enough to operations to see the problems, but senior enough to imagine solutions. Mitcher gives Ramsey a chance. One carrier, USS Bunker Hill, 6 weeks to prove the concept or drop it forever. If anything goes wrong, if anyone dies because of faster deck operations, Ramsey's career is over, and the idea is buried. Bunker Hill's air group commander is skeptical. Most of his squadron leaders are skeptical. They've been doing carrier operations one way for years. They've lost friends to deck accidents. They don't want to speed up a process that's already dangerous. Ramsey doesn't demand they speed up. That's the key insight. He asks them to look at the gaps. Where does the system stall? Where do crews wait? Where does information fail to flow? They discover something interesting. The ordnance teams are often ready before the aircraft are positioned. The fuel crews are often waiting while ordnance is loaded. The pilots are often briefed and ready while their aircraft are still being armed. Everyone is working hard, but nobody is working together in a synchronized system. Ramsey proposes something simple. Divide each launch evolution into parallel tracks instead of sequential steps. Don't wait for one aircraft to be fully ready before starting the next. Have fuel crews, ordnance teams, and maintenance crews working on multiple aircraft simultaneously in a choreographed sequence. The first test is chaos. Aircraft are spotted wrong. Fuel lines get crossed. Ordnance teams trip over each other. It takes longer than the old method. The pilots are not impressed. But Ramsey isn't discouraged. He videos the test, studies it, identifies every mistake. Then they try again. And again. By the 4th attempt, the system starts to flow. By the 10th attempt, they're matching the old time. By the 20th attempt, they're beating it by 10 minutes. The breakthrough comes when they realize the flight deck crews need to think like a pit crew at a race, not like a construction team building something. Everything happens fast, but everyone knows exactly what they're doing and when. The fuel crew doesn't wait to be told. They see an aircraft land and they're already moving. The ordnance team is right behind them. The maintenance chief does his walk around while fuel is flowing. After 6 weeks, Bunker Hill can cycle 36 aircraft in 45 minutes. That's the same number of aircraft that used to take 90 minutes. They're not cutting safety checks. They're not taking shortcuts on critical procedures. They're eliminating wait time and empty motion. Admiral Mitcher watches a demonstration in March 1943. He times it himself. 36 Hellcats and Avengers launch, fly a practice strike, return, land, rearm, and launch again in 72 minutes total. Under the old system, that evolution would take at least 2.5 hours. Mitcher sends a one-sentence message to Admiral Nimitz. The message changes everything. The Navy now understands they have a weapon that doctrine never anticipated. Not a new bomb or a faster aircraft or better armor. They have operational tempo. They have the ability to hit harder and faster than the enemy can respond. But that's just the beginning of the story. Now the Navy pays attention. Word spreads through the Pacific Fleet that Bunker Hill is doing something different with flight operations. Carrier captains start asking questions. Air group commanders want details. But there's resistance. Serious resistance from people who matter. Captain Harold Stassen, commanding officer of USS Enterprise, writes a formal objection to Admiral Nimitz in April 1943. He argues that speed creates risk. He cites 3 deck accidents from rushed procedures on other carriers in the past year. He points out that one major fire on a carrier deck can put that carrier out of action for months. He notes that Enterprise survived multiple battles through careful procedure and crew discipline, not through speed. He's not wrong about the danger. USS Saratoga spent 3 months in repair after a deck fire in January 1943. The fire started when a fuel crew rushed a connection and left a valve partially open. 23 men were injured. 2 died. The investigation blamed inadequate safety protocols during rapid turnaround operations. Other senior officers share Stassen's concerns. They remember the peacetime years when the Navy lost carriers to accidents. They remember the bureaucratic battles to get safety protocols implemented. They're not going to throw those protocols away way for a logistics officer's theory about parallel workflows. Mitchell doesn't force adoption. He can't. He's not the overall Pacific Fleet commander. He can't order every carrier to change procedures. Instead, he makes it competitive. He announces that any carrier air group that can match Bunker Hill's performance will get priority for new aircraft and first pick of replacement pilots. Suddenly, every carrier captain wants in, not because they believe in the new system, because they want the new Hellcats and the experienced replacement pilots. Competition drives innovation faster than orders ever could. The training program expands rapidly. Ramsey and a team of experienced flight deck chiefs travel from carrier to carrier throughout mid-1943. They don't teach theory, they don't lecture. They watch operations, identify bottlenecks, propose solutions. Every carrier is different. Every crew has different strengths. The program adapts to each ship. On USS Yorktown, the bottleneck is ordnance handling. The magazines are positioned awkwardly, and moving bombs and ammunition to the flight deck takes too long. Ramsey can't redesign the ship, but he can redesign the workflow. He proposes staging ordnance on the hangar deck during flight operations, so it's ready when aircraft land. It cuts 3 minutes per aircraft off the turnaround time. On USS Essex, the fuel crews are fast, but the maintenance checks are slow. Too many checklists, too much redundant inspection. Ramsey works with the maintenance chief to streamline the checks without eliminating any actual safety verification. They reduce the checklist from 42 items to 28 items by combining related checks and eliminating duplicates. The aircraft are just as safe, but the process is faster. On USS Intrepid, the problem is communication. The air officer on the bridge can't see half the flight deck clearly. He's making decisions based on incomplete information. Ramsey proposes adding 2 deck coordinators with radio headsets who relay real-time information about aircraft position and readiness. It's a simple change that dramatically improves decision-making speed. If you're finding this valuable, hit that like button and subscribe. We release new tactical breakdowns every week. By late 1943, American carriers are operating at a tempo the Japanese can't match. The results start showing up in combat operations. When Task Force 58 hits Truk in February 1944, they launch over 500 sorties in 2 days from 12 carriers. That's more sorties than the entire Japanese carrier fleet launched at Pearl Harbor. More sorties than most historians thought possible from that number of carriers. The Japanese base commanders at Truk report continuous waves of American aircraft for 8 hours straight on both days. Their combat logs note that American carriers appear to be launching strikes every 30 to 40 minutes throughout the daylight hours. The base defenses are overwhelmed. They shoot down 25 American aircraft, but they can't stop the attacks. By the end of the second day, Truk is effectively neutralized as a naval base. Japanese naval intelligence is confused. They know how many carriers the Americans have in theater. Reconnaissance aircraft and submarine reports confirm 12 carriers in Task Force 58. They know roughly how many aircraft each Essex-class carrier holds, 80 to 90 aircraft per carrier. The math should work out to maybe 300 available aircraft accounting for maintenance and reserves. But the Americans are launching 500 sorties. The numbers don't match. Some intelligence officers theorize the Americans must have additional carriers that haven't been spotted. Others suggest the Americans have developed some new rapid refueling technology that allows faster turnaround times. One intelligence report from March 1944 speculates about automated ordnance handling systems on American carriers. The truth is simpler and more frightening. American carriers are operating at nearly twice the tempo of Japanese carriers using better procedures and better crew coordination. It's not technology, it's not magic, it's industrial efficiency applied to naval warfare. It's the same thinking that makes American factories produce twice as many tanks and aircraft as Axis factories. Applied to carrier operations, it's devastating. Here's where the story gets really interesting. This isn't just about speed, it's about sustainability. A carrier that can launch strikes twice as fast can also maintain pressure longer. Traditional carrier doctrine says you launch one massive alpha strike with everything you have, then pull back to rearm for the next day. You hit hard once, then you're vulnerable while you recover and rearm. The Americans are now launching continuous smaller strikes throughout the day. It changes the entire tactical equation in ways Japanese commanders don't immediately understand. Defending against one massive strike is hard but possible. You concentrate your fighters at the expected attack time. You position your anti-aircraft guns. You prepare damage control teams. You endure 10 or 15 minutes of intense action. Then you recover. Your pilots land, refuel, and prepare for the next day. Your gun crews restock ammunition. Your damage control teams repair what they can. Defending against continuous strikes over 8 hours is impossible. Your fighter pilots fly one mission, land, and before they can refuel and rearm properly, another wave is inbound. They launch again exhausted, then again, then again. By the fourth sortie, pilot fatigue becomes dangerous. Reaction times slow, decision-making suffers, accidents increase. Your anti-aircraft gun crews face the same problem. They fire at the first wave, reload, fire at the second wave, reload, fire at the third wave. By the fourth wave, they're out of ready ammunition and waiting for resupply from the magazines. By the sixth wave, some guns have overheated barrels and need replacement. By the eighth wave, the crews are making mistakes from exhaustion. Your damage control teams never get ahead of the problem. They're always reacting, never preparing. A near miss from the first strike causes minor flooding. They're containing it when the second strike hits and starts a fire. They're fighting the fire when the third strike damages the rudder. They're never finished with one problem before the next one arrives. This continuous pressure breaks defensive systems, not through overwhelming force in any single moment, but through relentless accumulation of stress and damage over hours. The Japanese discover this the hard way. At Truk, at the Marianas, at the Philippines, at Iwo Jima. Everywhere American carriers operate in 1944, they impose this continuous rhythm that Japanese forces can't counter. But there's a cost to this approach that the Navy doesn't advertise in press releases. American carrier crews work brutal hours to maintain this operational tempo. 18-hour days become routine. 20-hour days happen during major operations. The flight deck crews on USS Lexington during the Battle of the Philippine Sea work for 23 consecutive hours, with only brief meal breaks. They rearm and refuel over 200 aircraft in that period. It's an incredible achievement. It's also unsustainable. Accidents increase, not catastrophically, but measurably. In 1944, American carriers experienced 12% more deck accidents than in 1943. Most are minor. A mechanic breaks his arm when an engine hoist slips. An ordnance man suffers burns from a fuel splash. A pilot stumbles on a tie-down chain and tears a knee ligament. Small incidents, but they add up. None are catastrophic like the Saratoga fire, but men are injured. Aircraft are damaged. Ships lose capability. The Navy addresses this by building redundancy into every system. Each carrier now has backup crews for critical positions. If a fuel crew chief goes down injured, there's a trained replacement ready. If an ordnance handler is exhausted, there's a fresh replacement to take over. It requires more personnel per carrier, but it maintains operational tempo. Pilots are rotated off flight status more frequently. Before the new procedures, a pilot might fly 5 or 6 days straight during operations, then rest. Now pilots fly 2 days, rest 1 day, fly 2 days, rest 1 day. It reduces individual pilot fatigue and maintains the overall sortie rate because there are always fresh pilots available. Medical staff increases on every carrier. Essex-class carriers now carry 8 doctors instead of 5. Corpsmen increase from 20 to 32. The sick bay expands. It's a recognition that high-tempo operations create more injuries, both from accidents and from simple exhaustion. Men working 20-hour days in 100-degree heat on a steel deck get heat exhaustion. They get dehydrated. They make mistakes when they're tired. Admiral Mitcher writes a confidential memo in August 1944 addressing the sustainability question directly. He notes that high-tempo carrier operations are possible but cannot be sustained indefinitely without crew rest and ship maintenance. He recommends that carriers operate in rotation, with 1/3 of a task force always standing down for maintenance and crew rest, while 2/3 remain operational. The Navy adopts this recommendation. It becomes standard procedure by September 1944. It's a mature understanding that operational tempo is a resource that must be managed carefully, not just maximized blindly. This brings us to June 19th, 1944, the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Everything we've been building toward culminates here. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa commands the Japanese mobile fleet approaching from the west, 9 carriers, 473 aircraft. He's planned this operation carefully. His carriers will launch strikes in 4 massive waves, Time to hit the American fleet simultaneously from different vectors. It's sophisticated carrier tactics requiring precise timing and careful coordination. It's the kind of operation Japanese carriers train for. Admiral Mark Mitcher commands Task Force 58, approaching from the east. 15 carriers, 956 aircraft. On paper, it's a significant American advantage, but not overwhelming. Japan has won battles against worse odds. But the numbers don't tell the real story. Ozawa plans to launch his strikes in 4 carefully prepared waves over 6 hours. Each wave will take 90 minutes to prepare, launch, and clear the decks for the next wave. It's standard Japanese carrier doctrine. It's proven. It's reliable. Mitcher doesn't bother with careful timing or synchronized waves. Task Force 58 just launches aircraft continuously. The American carriers are cycling fighters, bombers, and torpedo planes through combat at a steady rhythm. There's no massive alpha strike, just constant pressure. The Japanese first wave launches at 8:30 in the morning, 69 aircraft, fighters and dive bombers heading toward the American fleet 200 miles away. It's a strong strike, well coordinated. But the Americans are already launching. At 8:15, Mitcher puts up a standing fighter patrol of 40 Hellcats. At 8:45, he launches another 40 fighters. At 9:15, another group. The American carriers aren't reacting to Japanese strikes. They're maintaining constant fighter coverage over the task force. The Japanese first wave meets that standing fighter patrol at 9:40, 40 fresh American Hellcats against 69 Japanese aircraft. The American pilots have altitude advantage and clear radar warning of the incoming strike. The dogfight spreads across 50 miles of sky. While that battle rages, Mitcher launches another 40 fighters at 1000 hours. Some of the first group are already returning to rearm. They land, cycle through in 25 minutes, and launch again at 10:30. The Japanese pilots who survived the first interception now face fresh American fighters while they're low on fuel and ammunition. The Japanese second wave launches at 10:45, 109 aircraft. It's a massive strike, the largest carrier strike Japan has launched since Midway. Under normal doctrine, this wave should overwhelm American defenses. There's no way the Americans can have enough fighters to stop both waves. But they do, because American carriers are launching new fighter patrols every 25 to 30 minutes. The Hellcats that fought the first wave have landed, rearmed, and some are launching again. Fresh pilots in fresh aircraft cycle into the battle. Japanese pilots start reporting something their commanders don't want to believe. They report fighting American fighters that seem to appear in endless numbers. They report that American fighter patrols are everywhere, not concentrated for defense. They report that they're facing fresh opponents while they're exhausted. The reports are accurate. American carriers are maintaining 6 separate fighter patrols over the task force simultaneously. Each patrol has 25 to 40 aircraft. As one patrol runs low on fuel or ammunition, it cycles back to the carriers and a fresh patrol launches. It's carrier aviation as a sustained operation, not as a series of discrete strikes. Japanese strike aircraft trying to reach the American carriers have to fight through 3 layers of fighter patrols, then face concentrated anti-aircraft fire from the screening destroyers and cruisers, then face more fighters directly over the carriers. Most never get through. Those that do face wall of anti-aircraft fire, unlike anything they've encountered before. The third Japanese wave launches at 100 hours, 47 aircraft. It's smaller because Ozawa's carriers are having trouble maintaining the launch tempo. His flight deck crews are exhausted. His ordnance teams are rushing and making mistakes. One carrier, Hio, has a deck fire that delays launches by 30 minutes. The fourth Japanese wave launches at 1:30, 82 aircraft. But by this point, American fighters have been savaging Japanese formations for over 4 hours. Japanese pilots are exhausted. Many are on their second or third sortie of the day. Some are wounded from previous missions but flying anyway because there aren't enough replacement pilots. Meanwhile, American carriers haven't slowed down. They're still launching fighter patrols every 30 minutes like clockwork. The task force operates like a machine, smooth and relentless. By mid-afternoon, the battle is effectively over. The Japanese have launched 373 aircraft in 4 waves. They lose 330 aircraft. American losses are 29 aircraft. But then something happens that changes everything about carrier warfare. Admiral Ozawa retreats west with his remaining carriers. He's lost most of his aircraft, but his carriers are mostly intact. Under normal doctrine, he could withdraw, regroup, and potentially rebuild his air groups over the next few months. That's how carrier battles have worked. You fight, you withdraw, you rebuild. But Mitchell doesn't let him go. This is where the new American operational tempo reveals its full strategic implications. On June 20th, American reconnaissance aircraft locate the retreating Japanese fleet. They're 340 miles away. That's at the extreme range of American carrier aircraft. Launching a strike at that distance means many aircraft won't have enough fuel to return. Under traditional doctrine, you don't launch strikes beyond 250 miles. It's too risky. Mitchell launches anyway. 216 aircraft. Hellcats, Avengers, and Dauntlesses. They launch knowing some won't make it back. They launch because the Americans can afford the losses, and the Japanese can't afford to keep their carriers. The strike hits the Japanese fleet at sunset. They sink carrier Hio and 2 oilers. They damage several other carriers and cruisers. Then the American aircraft face the long flight back in darkness with low fuel. Here's where operational tempo becomes strategic capability. The American carriers recover those aircraft after dark using shipboard lights, full lights. Every carrier in the task force lights up like a city despite the risk of submarine attack. They guide their aircraft home using searchlights, deck lights, formation lights. It's dangerous. It violates every blackout protocol, but they do it anyway. They recover 116 aircraft. 80 crashed in the water when they ran out of fuel. 49 pilots and aircrew are lost. The rest are rescued by destroyers and submarines in the following days. It's the largest night carrier recovery operation ever attempted at that point in history. Why does this matter? Because it shows the Americans can project carrier air power beyond the previously accepted limits. They can strike further, sustain operations longer, and recover aircraft under conditions that doctrine says are impossible. The operational tempo they've developed doesn't just let them fight better in conventional battles, it lets them fight in ways that weren't previously possible. One Japanese carrier division commander, Admiral Takagi Joshima, writes in his after-action report that American carriers appeared to be operating at a rhythm his forces could not match or comprehend. He notes that his carriers successfully launched 3 strike waves, but that each wave met fresh American fighters while his own fighters were still on deck, being refueled and rearmed. He describes the American operational tempo as more significant than their numerical advantage. The aftermath of the Philippine Sea battle tells the complete story. Ozawa's carrier fleet survives but is combat ineffective. He still has carriers, he still has some aircraft, but his air groups are shattered. He lost 330 aircraft and over 400 trained pilots. Japan cannot replace those losses. The experienced carrier pilots are gone. The replacements are teenagers with minimal training. The American task force doesn't even slow down. They continue operations in the Marianas. On June 21st, they launch strikes against Guam and Rota. On June 22nd, more strikes. On June 23rd, they're still hitting targets. Task Force 58 operates continuously for 9 days during the Marianas campaign. They launch over 3,000 sorties. No carrier force in history has sustained that operational tempo before. The consequences ripple through the Pacific War. For the rest of 1944 and into 1945, American fast carrier task forces roam the Pacific striking targets at will. They hit Formosa in October. They support the Philippines invasion in October and November. They hit Iwo Jima in February 1945. They hit Okinawa in March. Eventually, they raid mainland Japan itself. Japanese commanders consistently report that American carriers appear to be everywhere simultaneously. It's not possible for the Americans to have carriers at all these locations at once, but the reports keep coming. The explanation is operational tempo. American carriers strike, withdraw, rearm quickly, and strike somewhere else. They complete in 3 days what Japanese carriers need a week to accomplish. The Japanese never match this operational tempo. It's not that they don't try. Japanese carrier crews work themselves to exhaustion trying to speed up their procedures. Senior officers issue directives demanding faster turnaround times. Flight deck crews train continuously to improve their coordination. But they're trapped by their carrier design and their doctrine. Japanese carriers have smaller hangars and smaller flight decks than American Essex-class carriers. The Shokaku-class carriers hold 72 aircraft compared to 90 aircraft on an Essex class. The flight decks are shorter and narrower, making aircraft movement more difficult. Japanese fuel systems are more complex. Their refueling procedures require more steps because Japanese aviation fuel is more volatile and requires more careful handling. Japanese ordnance is more complex. Their aerial torpedoes require more pre-flight preparation than American torpedoes. Their bombs have more complex fusing systems that require more time to set properly.